And Alan Horton, their radio voice, longtime radio voice, calls like that because it's a good time in Minnesota, the number 1 seed, Minnesota Timberwolves. Jason Ross here, now joined by Alan Horton here on our Folsom Lake Honda hotline. Alan, good morning. How are you?
Jason, that always gets me fired up, hearing some of my own highlights and my team doing well. It's been a few years since the Wolves were in this position. In fact, they really never have been in this position before. Even in the 2004 run to the Western Conference Finals, they had to win 9 in a row to end the season to kind of gain that top spot over, I think, the Kings. And so, this is the Wolves have been setting franchise records throughout the year. So it's been a lot of fun.
And the highlights I chose, I did it on purpose because I wanted to ask you. This was back on November 6th, so early in the season. That was the Boston game at home. You guys won in overtime, and look, you guys have 42 wins. There's a lot of good wins this season already, but that one, it was very early, but I went, oh, wait a minute. What's going on with Minnesota? Like, that one caught my attention, and then the record kept going. Was that maybe one of those early nights where you go, hey, there might be something special here?
That one was electric right from the opening tip, and the Wolves came away with the win that night and rose to the occasion against Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And then I think the Wolves backed it up later around Christmas when we went to Boston. They lost that game, but it was also in overtime.
Mm-hmm.
And so the two best teams in the NBA have gone to overtime both times, and it's been really good games. But you're right, that was an early kind of barometer where you win that game and you're like, okay, this, we know Boston is good. They've got the track record. Now can you play at this high level at a consistent rate and not have some letdowns against some lesser teams, which is really the problem last year. They just couldn't beat the 5 worst teams in the NBA. There were about 10 losses in there between those 5 teams, which is just, sunk their season. But I think you're right. That was a really big early season barometer against a really good team.
So how did you guys go from 42-40, which there's nothing wrong with that last year, to 42-17 right now? What a drastic change.
I was thinking about this, Jason. I think it's kind of similar to what the Kings did last year, right? I mean, you guys jumped to the 3rd seed after a 30-something win the year before?
Yeah.
So, there's this big jump that you have. You guys did it with offense. The Wolves have basically done it with defense. I mean, the Kings had that number 1 record-setting offense last year, and the Wolves are on this incredible pace on the defensive end of the floor. The gap between the number 1 defense and the number 2 defense is the greatest in the NBA since we started having play-by-play data, which was 28 years ago. So it's really that's how you can kind of judge how good a defense is, because those numbers keep going up and up as offenses continue to rise every single year. But that gap between 1 and 2, I think, shows you how good the Wolves have been defensively. And it started with Rudy Gobert. Last year was, this is what they were hoping for last season when they acquired Rudy Gobert. It didn't happen. It was a big adjustment for Rudy. He didn't play as well. He was a bit banged up to start the season. Cat missed 50-plus games with a calf injury. It just all didn't come together. They didn't quite have the right group. At that point, they still had D'Angelo Russell as their starting point guard. They jettisoned him at the trade deadline, got Mike Conley, who has been an absolute savior, and they just locked him up for 2 more years. This guy is just, Jason, I've been in the NBA for 18 years now, 17 with Minnesota. I've just never come across another player quite like Mike Conley. What he brings on the floor, what he brings off the floor, how he brings his teammates together, how he is in the community, how he is with his family. He's a very unique player in this league and a unique person as well. And he's made a huge difference.
Yeah, it's so funny when, obviously when the trade deadline happened last year, Alan, I mean, we had legends of the game move. I mean, we had Kyrie Irving going to Dallas, Kevin Durant to Phoenix, and those are all the kind of things that are going to catch headlines. Westbrook changes teams. These are guys that have been MVPs or in conversation. And the Conley move, wasn't even talked about league-wide. And then once you see the results of it, and look, he's been a good player. He's been an all-star. I can't think of a better fit in a trade where there's bigger names, but the fit was perfect for you guys.
There's no doubt about it. And D'Angelo Russell brings some different things. He's a different personality. It has different aspects to his game. And the Wolves, needed something exactly opposite, which was Mike Conley. Just someone who's pass first, get people involved, understands the game, understands what the coach wants him and his team to do. And just the way he handles himself, it was just a complete 180. And it was the perfect fit for the Timberwolves. it basically brought everything together. And another guy that was in that trade that was kind of a throw-in, and if nobody's talking about Mike Conley, you're right, all those big names moving around at the trade deadline, then nobody was ever even mentioning Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who has turned into a super sixth man, not only for his Canadian national team, but also for the Timberwolves. I don't put too much stock. I don't go overboard on the defensive field goal percentage that the NBA keeps track of. When you hold the guy who's shooting against you to a low shooting percentage, I think there's a lot of kind of gray area in that. But it is what it is. He's ranked in the top 5 all season long. He's been unbelievable defensively. He's arguably the Wolves' best defender, along with Jaden McDaniels. So the Wolves got really 2 key pieces in that deal and gave up just D'Angelo Russell, and they end up getting 3 second-round picks back, which they have since used a few of them to try to move up in the draft and get some other guys. But a really good move pulled off by Tim Conley.
We're talking with Alan Horton, the longtime radio voice of the Minnesota Timberwolves here on the Folsom Lake Honda Hotline. So you brought up the defense. Metrics-wise, they are number 1 in that gap, that separation that you talked about. Very significant. I say a lot of nights in the NBA, because more nights than not, you're playing, we see 135 to 131, 128 to, and it's pretty common. And I'm like, who is good defensively? Well, you guys are. So what is a good Minnesota Timberwolves night of defense look like?
It's just making the opponents basically miserable. You can see the body language change throughout the game when they just kind of get frustrated. Every shot is a difficult shot. And sometimes when you do get the open look, I think there's pressure on teams, extra pressure to knock those down, because they realize it's so hard. Points are so hard to come by. The Wolves don't give up a lot of points in the paint. They're in the top 5 in that category. They've become a really good defensive rebounding team, not as good as the Kings, who are number 1, but they're limiting second chance points. They don't allow teams to get out and fast break and kind of get some of those easy points, right? Fast break points, second chance points, shots at the rim, points in the paint. Those are easy points that gets offenses going. And when you don't get those and you force teams into contested mid-range or contested threes, it can be a long night. I mean, sometimes you run into some hot shooting and teams are just flat out, offenses are clicking and you can't stop them. But for the most part, the Wolves aren't playing those 120 and 130 point games. They're down at 100 or 110, which, translate back to when we were growing up, Jason. That's like in the 80s and 90 point games. That's how much the game has changed over the last couple of decades. They've got really good defenders who Chris Finch says they just flat out love to defend. And it shows. And their offense it's been a middle of the road offense all season. They've had some ups and downs where you think things are kicking in. Like right before the All-Star break, the Wolves had a great stretch of offense, but then the All-Star break hit and that threw everything out of whack. But they're reliant on their defense, and that's what's carried them to this 42 wins so far.
I know we're still, several hours from tip-off for tonight, but we're hearing word about Kyle Anderson maybe doubtful for tonight. Anthony Edwards, though, questionable. Do you have a status update on either of those two?
Well, Ant hurt his ankle in the Tuesday night game against San Antonio, and he kind of, it was a non-contact injury, kind of caught his toe on the floor and just twisted his own ankle. Had to come out of the game, but came back, played the second half. Then he played again on Wednesday. And so, that's the tough part about the injury report is that, teams will leave that injury on there just in case there's the 5%, 1%, 8% chance that, something acts up. And they've got that to fall back on. Because if you take that off, and then all of a sudden, right before the game, somebody tweaks, re-injures it, it wasn't on, you're now at risk for getting who knows how, $20,000, $25,000, $50,000. I know that's not a lot to guys like you and me, Jason, but, for the team, they care about that kind of stuff. And so sometimes it's on there more for precautionary. I would expect Anthony Edwards to be suiting up. Now, Kyle's injury did keep him out last game. And so he is, I think he was upgraded to doubtful. So, we'll see where he's at.
One of the things I would say probably a lot of people when they look at the Timberwolves and see what their record is, and they certainly have to acknowledge how, and as tough as the top 10 in the West have been, everybody above 500, I think people would point to Allen when they get to the postseason, how dangerous are they because of lack of experience? Is that a fair point to bring up on Minnesota, or what would be your pushback on that?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fair. It's interesting to see, and I don't know if you guys went through this last year with the national attention. You all of a sudden, Timberwolves fans are loving life, right? They're in the number 1 Western spot, and they don't get on Christmas, and they're not talked about on TNT. Stephen A. Smith isn't blabbering about them on First Take and all those kind of shows. And they say, hey, where's our talk? Where's our talk? Well, be careful what you wish for, because they don't know anything about Minnesota. They haven't been following it. All they did was rip the Rudy Gobert trade from 2 years ago and said it can't work. And so when they do start to talk about you, that's what they say. They say, we'll have to see in the postseason. How, last time we saw Rudy in the playoffs, he got played off the floor, and the Clippers, a couple of years ago, came back and beat the Jazz with that unbelievable second half in which Rudy was just running all over the floor and got exposed. But he didn't have the kind of defense that he has around him now. But I think all those things are fine, and Chris Finch will embrace this as well. Yeah, they have to improve it in the postseason, and there might be some questions. I don't know if it's experience, because I think the last 2 years the Wolves have played really competitive first-round series. They lost to Denver in 5 games last year, 6 games to Memphis the year before that, and they're bringing in Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert, who have plenty of playoff experience. So I think the experience is there. I think it's all going to matter about the matchup and how the Wolves fare against, whoever it might be. It could be the Kings in the first round. It might be Denver in the second round. There's some really good teams, and it's going to, the regular season is the regular season. You can get by only facing, Denver 4 times a year, because that means you got, 78 games against other teams. But when you get locked into that 7-game series, now everything's on the line. It'll be interesting. I think matchup will depending on what the team is, will dictate more of the Wolves' success than anything.
And obviously, you guys have had more success basically than anybody in the West at 42-17 amongst the West that you could play. Like, is there one that matchup wise that you've maybe seen more of a trouble for the Timberwolves?
It's so funny. We've been focusing so much on the top 4 and finishing in the top 4 and looking at it's been this battle for a couple of months with Oklahoma City and Minnesota, and the LA Clippers are faltering a little bit, and Denver's coming on strong. So we've been focused on that top 4 and just making sure the Timberwolves have at least a first round home playoff series. And I haven't looked too far down the standings of what kind of a matchup might work best. I mean, tonight will be telling, because Sacramento and Minnesota split the first 2 meetings. They each won on the other's home floor. The Wolves took 3 out of 4 last year from the Kings. But I thought one of the really impressive performances was when Sacramento came to Minnesota earlier in the year. The Wolves were flying high. Sacramento was on the second of a back-to-back, and they just played spectacularly. I thought I was really impressed with the way Mike Brown had that group flowing, because that was a really good win, I thought, for the Kings.
Yeah, and it's been a little bit of a strange year here, kind of what you said. I think there's a lot of parallels where the Kings fans have a little bit of that, hey, talk about us, but then when you're not talking about, it kind of like they want more attention, more love, and then when they get it, they're not saying the right things about the Kings. And the Kings have basically the same record as a year ago, but they were the 3 seed. Now they're kind of scratching and clawing right there around 8th. So it just shows you how much better the West is this year.
It's unbelievable, and your offense isn't quite where it was last year, but the numbers are pretty similar to what they did last year. It's just that the rest of the league has just gotten, saw that what the Kings were doing and say, hey, we gotta juice up our offense too to compete. It's crazy how good some of these teams are, and it's just it's the national people. Be careful what you wish for, like I said. Because also they haven't been focusing in, and they can't actually talk about how good Anthony Edwards has been this year, or Karl-Anthony Towns accepting his role, or Rudy Gobert and what he's doing defensively, how he's deterring shots. He deters shots that people don't even want to take because they dribble into the paint. They look at the big man, they say, "I'm out of here. This guy's blocking 2.5 shots a game, and we can get a better look." And then next thing you know, that shot clock is expired. So they don't have the expertise on the actual team, and I'm sure it was like that in Sacramento last year, where they're just they have to prove it to us in the postseason, and that's because that's what you default. You don't know anything more to talk intelligently about how good the team has been.
What do you see for 3 years from now, 4 years from now, for a guy like Anthony Edwards, who already has just blossomed into just a terrific young player? I think he's 22 still.
Still 22.
Man, I mean, where is he going to be, Alan, in 3 years, let's say, from now?
Well, if you graph his development right now, it'd be a straight line, a diagonal line of improvement every single year. I mean, his numbers have gone up. Starting this year, his first 3 years, all his points, his rebounds, assists, his blocks, his shooting numbers from 2, from 3, from the free throw, they've all gone up every single year. This guy is just relentless in his determination to be one of the best players in this league. And he has added things to his game that are very similar to Michael Jordan. And if you're going to try to emulate someone, I guess in this game, that's a pretty good person to pick. I mean, Michael, Kobe, whoever you want, but Ant's even wearing the kind of the wristband that's up around his elbow, like on his forearm where MJ used to wear it. Ant has picked up this mid-range turnaround bank shot off the glass that Michael would do so often. And Kobe, of course, adopted that shot as well. I don't know where he can end up because it's been incredible. And Jason, there are times in the game where the Wolves will build a big lead, and then he starts to try to bank in threes. I mean, that's where he's at with this game. Like, that makes me a little nervous. He knows they haven't accomplished anything. He's got the right mindset. But in those games, even up by 20, he has said he's gonna start shooting left-handed. He's gonna start banking in threes. That's also a sign that Chris Finch is like, okay, you're done. This game is over. You're coming to the bench. But it's amazing. And of course, he's got this such electric, dynamic personality where every time he talks to the media, you're just engrossed in what he is saying because he's just got this great young personality that just kind of bubbles through. It's been incredible. And I mean, the improvement in his game is remarkable, and it's scary to think of where this team is going.
I'd be curious, Alan, too, that in the general area, their choices, you got lots of other opportunities out there from college teams to the Vikings and the Twins to different parts of the year. Where are the T-Wolves kind of landing now in the sports landscape of people in your area?
Yeah, starting to make their mark. It's been a rough, two decades. It's the playoffs were a good taste the last couple of years, but I tell you what, and I think you guys Kings fans can probably relate to this. When you get ownership and you get your front office in line, you get the right coach in here with the right culture building, and then you get the right players. It all kind of flows in sort of this circle, right? Like this is the best the front office has been and most stable. The coaching staff as well. The culture is just at a point that I've never seen before. There's no drama with players, with coaches. There's really no infighting. There's no kind of drama that we saw last year, quite frankly, when Jaden McDaniels is punching a wall and breaking his ham in the final game of the regular season, when Rudy Gobert is punching Kyle Anderson in the chest during a timeout. Wow. There's none of that this year. And that's really amazing that I think it goes to Chris Finch's leadership is how they've been able to move on from that. Like, that's not something like we come to blows. I don't know. I mean, you punch me, Jason, or I punch you. I think it might take a little while to figure things out, especially when you're dealing with hard-headed, successful people like NBA players are. But they've moved past that, and those guys are really tight now. And that camaraderie is kind of shine through. So fans are starting to show up in droves. Home games are now, on a Tuesday night in February. When the temperature is 10 below outside,
Ugh.
The lower, things are packed now, as opposed to, maybe 5,000 or 7,000 people not showing up because of the weather and because of the way the team is playing. And it's only building towards this crescendo in the postseason.
I want to go back really quickly on that point you made. I forgot about that Gobert and Anderson incident. And you're right, because I think personally out here that completely derailed the Warriors last year. I mean, I know they still got to the playoffs and beat the Kings, but I just knew that the internally, the Jordan Poole, Draymond Green, something was going to have to change, and they moved on from Jordan Poole and whatever. They moved on with themselves. But for those guys to stay on the same team, still be on the team this year and thriving, that says a lot about them and how everything was handled.
Yep, it's it really is this culture of just kind of winning and everybody on the same page. And when players see that from the coaches and coaches see that faith from the front office, it all kind of flows together. And I like to think the radio guy kind of holds it all together. That's the glue that kind of meshes all those things together.
I can confirm that, Alan. I can confirm it. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Best of luck on the call tonight and certainly in the postseason. I mean, that's nice to say. Like sometimes, well, you got to get there. When you're 42-17, you're getting there. That's a nice spot to be in.
Yeah, I think I looked at Basketball Reference and saw the playoff. I've been looking at that occasionally, but I try not to look at it. But it kind of shows 100% when you get to this. And it's been there for about a month or so. But I'll still yet to believe it. But they've already tied their win total from all of last year. 42-40, now 42-17. It's just been it's kind of a little mind-boggling. And sometimes you don't step back and kind of look at it and appreciate it because the team is in that grind. The record doesn't matter because they've got to practice the next day, then a shoot around, then a game, then we're on a flight, then you got a shoot around, then you're getting some sleep, and you're just in this routine. And so sometimes you do not look back and step back from a second and just realize, holy cow, got a 1-game lead over the Thunder. We're top of the West. It's been remarkable.
Well, that's probably it, right? Boston's got an 8-game lead. They're going to win the East. Where you guys, I mean, you're getting pushed. Thunder are there. The Nuggets, the champs, are a game and a half back. So you guys have to keep going. I think that's a good spot to be in.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot for being 42-17. It feels like there's a ton of pressure because if you have a bad week, you could be out of the top 4. Well, maybe get to that 4 spot.
Yeah.
You could drop really fast if you drop a game or two.
Yeah. Well, best of luck tonight, Alan, and the rest of the way. We really appreciate your time and keep up the great work.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you. That's Alan Horton joining us there on the Folsom Lake Honda Hotline. What a spot to be in for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Yeah, there's some jealousy there.